Good morning, class, and welcome to today's lecture on the cell membrane. If you remember right to our basic generalization, the cell membrane is around the outside of the cell. It also covers a lot of the organelles you studied, like the mitochondria, chloroplast, endoplasmic reticulum, Golgi, the nucleus, are all surrounded in a cell membrane, or a plasma membrane, as you will soon have them called. And remember, all cells have this. We're going to talk about this today because you guys are going to be doing a little activity on the internet to get more familiar with the cell membrane, which will lead us into the diffusion of molecules. As we go through, there's going to be a lot of vocab words. Some of these we'll do in our next unit, biomolecules, where we talk about proteins, amino acids. But what I really want you guys to focus on is, what is the cell membrane? What is it composed of? And then what its purpose is for life, how it's going to work. Okay, a little review for you. Here's an animal cell. Remember this plasma membrane, so it's this whole outside, and then it's the stuff that's around all these other organelles. Okay, same within a plant, except the plant has the cell wall. And here's kind of a picture drawing representation that we will see quite a few of these of a plasma membrane. So it's made up of these proteins, which, if you think of steaks, really high in proteins. Steaks also high in fat, and these little alien-looking tail things, heads with two tails, are called phospholipids. They're going to make up the bilayer, and then you have these little carbohydrates like starches sticking out of them. And this is how cells communicate with each other and tell them, this is my job, this is your job, I belong, you don't belong. We'll get into those. Okay, so our cell membrane is composed of a double layer. So we call it a bilayer because bi is two. And so you get two layers of these things called phospholipids. And then integrated in them is a bunch of protein. There's also some cholesterol that gives it more structure. We'll get into that. And as we already talked about, it surrounds the outside of all cells and their organelles. And its main job is to control what enters and leaves the cell. Also some communication with these little blue things sticking up. But really, it's going to say you may enter or you may not. Okay, phospholipids, this is something we'll cover in the next unit, but we kind of decided to do this one first because diffusion is just so important and it has so much to do with the cell water. So phospholipids are what makes up this membrane of the cell. So here's that bilayer again, and these little red things with the yellow tails, those are my phospholipids. Here is a zoom up of a phospholipid, and it's got these two tails on it. These are chemicals. These are called fatty acids. Maybe you've heard of fatty acids when you talk about like omega-3 fatty acids, and some of these we require for life, but we need to eat this in our food. And then it's got this phosphate head that is going to become very important. Okay, and here's where the heads come important. So the heads, and I want you guys to write this down, are hydrophilic. And hydrophilic, hydro meaning water, philic means attracted to. So these heads are attracted to water, okay? On the other end, these tails are what we call hydrophobic. And so if you're phobic, you hate water. So these are water hating, and the top is water loving. So if you've ever poured oil, which, by the way, oil is made out of these fatty acids. If you pour oil in water, what does the oil always do? It clumps up, right? It all sticks together. That's because it has these fatty acids that don't like water. So they're going to go try to find as best they can not water, which would mean they're going to attach to the other oil. So that is what happens with these cell membranes, and they're actually kind of fluidy. We'll watch a little video in a second. But these tops like water, so outside of your cell is water. Think of your blood, mostly water. And the inside of your cell and the cytoplasm is very water. By the way, lumen means inside. So you got water, water, and then these heads want to go towards the water, and the tails turn away from the water. So they're like, get away, I hate water. And up here, they're like, I love water. But because they do that, they end up forming this bilayer. So the two tails touch each other because they're keeping the water away, and then the heads like the water, and what they end up making is this like phospholipid bilayer that blocks water from being in the inside here, although water can still travel through. We'll talk about that. But it forces it to form this like really cool thing called the cell membrane. Here's kind of just a video to see, we call it the fluid mosaic model because these things really aren't attached to each other. They're only there because of the water. If you were to dry out the water, those would all just wouldn't care where they're stuck to. So this is kind of an animation of what a cell membrane would be like. You got our phospholipids, and then you see we add some cholesterol, which gives it strength, and then proteins, because we need to allow things in and out. Okay, here's just a picture, a drawing of it once again, and you can see these phospholipid bilayers. But we're also going to add these things called proteins in the cell because remember, its job is to determine who gets to go in and out. So if we just had this one membrane without these proteins, some things could get in and out, but some things couldn't, and we call that permeability. Part of that fluid mosaic is these things can actually move around. They can transfer space. It makes it really cool. It's like a floating place because maybe this protein needs to go over here to grab something or go over here to grab something. So it's allowed some mobility within the cell. Okay, within there, we've talked about channel and carrier proteins. So these are the only two I really want you to know about. Going back here, this might be a channel or carrier protein. This would definitely be a channel protein. And then a carrier protein maybe is more like this guy, and we'll go see what they do. So channel proteins, they're kind of just always open, and they allow things to go in and out. Some can be gated, meaning we could put a little gate on here to prevent something from coming in, but as soon as the gate's gone, molecules can just freely flow from this structure. They can go in and out. Where some are carrier proteins, so in this case, they actually might require some energy, and they actually carry molecules across to allow them to enter, or they can close and not allow them to enter. So these are truly our door keepers. So you got channel and carrier proteins. Their job is just to help move large molecules in and out of the cell. These, as we go on through the semester, are going to be very, very important. Your muscles work by allowing a sodium channel to open up. Okay, so very, very important. Glycoproteins I'm going to mention because your activity has them. They are proteins that then have a carbohydrate on the top of them, and I like to think of these as flags. So they have little flags on them, and it allows them to tell other cells what type of cell they are. It also tells me if it belongs to my body or a different person's body. So if a bacteria comes in, it's going to have a glycoprotein that my body will say, whoop, that's not me, and it'll try to kill it. So these are very important for communication and identification. Okay, two big vocabulary words, permeability and selective permeability. Permeability is just the ability to allow materials to pass through. So if something's very permeable, almost everything gets through it, okay? If it's impermeable, like a really good mask, only a little bit gets through. So we would say that this is permeable to water, but it's semi-permeable. It doesn't allow anything in. So selective permeability is kind of like semi-permeability. So it allows some molecules to pass through while keeping others out. Okay, so those are two vocab words. We're now going to use those vocab words. Here's an idea of selective permeability. What's passing through? Water. What is not allowed to pass through? Macaroni, and that just made pasta, made me hungry. I'm going to go eat. So when we're talking about the cell, what the cell is permeable to, what it allows in is water, oxygen, and carbon dioxide. These three things can flow in and out of the cell. Nothing's going to stop them. Okay. Other things like nitric oxide can flow freely through the cell. A lot of small gases. Okay. These things cannot pass through the cell, so they're going to need one of those protein channels to get through. And so those things are things like amino acids. So proteins are going to require proteins to move in and out of the cell. So when we eat our food, we have to transfer the parts of our food, which are proteins and amino acids, in and out. Glucose is the sugar that gives us energy. It's going to need something to allow it in and out of the cell. It cannot go through the cell by itself. The gatekeeper has to let it in. All of these things have to be let in by a gatekeeper, and we can control how much comes in and out using those gatekeepers. And other things like salts. So Na plus is sodium, Ca plus is calcium, magnesium, all the stuff you find in Gatorade, those are salts. They need to be controlled when they can come in and out. Very important for life. This is just one more slide talking about that, and we'll be done. So these are protein channels. They're the doormen, right? So they're in this phospholipid bilayer, and some things are going to allow amino acids and, say, glucose in. Okay, the layer right here, this just fluid mosaic thing of fatty acids, it'll allow water to go freely through it, hydrogen peroxide, oxygen, carbon dioxide, all these things can just diffuse right through the membrane. Speaking of diffusion, quickly write this down, we'll talk about it more in class, is the movement of molecules from an area of high concentration to lower concentration until there's equal amounts of molecules on each side. So in this case, these molecules, there's more on this side, they're going to go to this side. If you're at home and you want to see diffusion work, just drop some food coloring in a glass of water, and where that drop is really high concentration of the color, and you'll see it spread out and diffuse to the rest of the room. If your family member just passed gas, they just released a bunch of stinky molecules into the room, and I'm pretty sure you've experienced that they eventually diffuse across the whole room and into your nose. So that is diffusion, is the movement of molecules from an area of high to an area of low. So the molecules always want to move. This is just life and science. Things want to move from areas of high concentration to areas of low concentration. One other term that'll come up is osmosis. So this is the special term for water, diffusion of water, and it always goes from higher to lower concentrations as well, except this time it's the water that moves instead of the salt. So if we picture this as a cell, okay, these are both cells. If you remember right, salts cannot pass freely through here. They need to have one of these channels. So if that channel is not there, even though the salt here, the red, we'll say the red is salt, wants to move this way because it wants to go from high salt to low salt, right? Always wants to move this way. It can't. But what can move is water. So if I add more water to this side, it becomes less salty, making this side more salty until they're equal salty. Okay, so osmosis means the water moves, and it kind of goes from a low concentration of salt to a higher concentration. Okay. Okay, so movement of molecules, concentration. So like I said, it will always move from high to low concentration. This happens without any energy. It's just the nature of gases and things out there. We could, in the cell, move it from low to high, but we're going to have to put energy into that. We'll talk about that later. Things that also depend on movement is how big is it? What's its charge? The reason salts can't get through, they're not very big, but they have this weird charge. I'm not going to have you guys worry about too much on that page, but we do want to talk about this one little thing. So if this is inside my cells and outside, everything's pretty equal. We have no movement, okay? This side is about the same as outside, okay? This time, inside my cells is very salty, outside is pure water, and where does the water want to go? It wants to make this less salty, so it's more like this side, so all the water is going to go in here. My cell would swell up really, really big. So when we drink fresh water, that's exactly what happens. But now I'm on this island and I have salt water all around me. Not good, because even though it's lots of water, it's mostly salt, and inside my cell is less salty. So in this case, all the water leaves my cell, even though I'm dying of thirst, to try to make this more or less salty, more watery, and I end up dehydrating myself and dying. We're going to go into this much, much more, but I just wanted to give you a quick intro before you did your activity on the cell membrane today. You guys will now start on that activity. I have some directions for that.